Today is July 26, 2012. This is being filmed in Sacramento, California. My name is Richard Allen. I'm with the Retired Senior Volunteer Program. Today we're introducing this young man here. And could you introduce yourself to us, sir?
Thank you, sir. My name is Robert M. Blair, and I was a corporal in the service in the Army Air Corps at that time. It was all under the Army. There was no Air
Right.
Force at that time. And my 3949, beg your pardon, 39414-978 was my serial number.
After all these years?
And I went into the service in 1943, about April the 1st, I believe it was. And I went to basic training. First I was inducted.
Okay, first off, how did you go into the service? Were you enlisted? Did you draft?
I was drafted into
drafted
the service.
to the service.
Yes.
And what were you doing before you got drafted? Were you in school?
I was a fingerprint analyst for the state of California. I worked in through the Department of the Penology, which was later became the Department of Justice. And I had been in there for, I went in 6 months before Pearl Harbor, and then I was inducted into the service on about, like I say, April of 1943, and I served my basic training in Fresno, California. 3 months of basic training, and then I was sent from there to Fort Custer, Michigan, to train for an MP investigator, which at the time was, they had noticed my prior record at the time in the Department of Justice, and so I was I finally was graduated out of there as a military investigator, but it was late during the war at that time, and a lot of us were sent to Kelly Field, Texas, which was a part of the Air Force naturally at that. It has been ever since. And then while I was down there, I was not sent out from Kelly Field, Texas to what the fellows in my school, the ones that they needed, they sent them to Camp Barclay. And like I say, there was such an overage of fellows at that time that they didn't need anymore. So I remained in the replacement depot down there for probably a matter of 4 or 5 months, and then I aspired to going to Air Force in the Air Cadets, because that was Kelly Field, Texas, was all about the flying status fellows at that time. And so I went into cadet training and was there just a short while when they found out that my eyes, due to the fact I had been reading fingerprints in the Department of Justice, my eyes were not fit for flying. So prior to flight training, I was what they call washed out cadet. And I came back to the replacement depot, and I stayed there for a while. And finally, I had to find something to do to avoid KP and guard duty all the time. So I found a job with the shipping and receiving department. And
So that's all they did while you were in waiting, is just put you on guard and KP and
yes, when
Just
you're in
a
a
replacement depot like that?
just to keep you busy, actually. And I did so much KP at that time, and so.
Were you given any free time to
Oh yes.
go
we
to
had-
town or whatever?
We came home. We went to town. San Antonio was our stop-off place all the time. We get on the bus and go into San Antonio, and then see a movie or whatever. And
How'd the people treat you?
oh, beautiful! The people were wonderful in San Antonio. In fact, every place we went, as long as you wore that uniform, why they treated us like kings. And so while I was at Kelly Field, we were at South Kelly Field at the time, and later we went over to an ordnance depot, Normoyle, Normoyle, because, like I say, there were so many fellas by that time. The time was summer of 1943, and so I'll beg your pardon. Yes, for 1943, because and I was there for a matter of about 18 months, and then.
What'd you do while you were there?
Well, like I said, I was at the shipping and receiving. We had our own barracks, and so we were considered permanent party. Well, we were anything but permanent party because one of my friends worked in the shipping, the assignments, and he knew only the assignments by their numbers. Well, he came to me one night in the barracks and he says, "I think we can both get out of here and go to Germany." Well, the war was over in Germany by that time, and so I says, "Well, I would be fine." Put me on the list. Well, all we had was a number to go by. So when we got to San Antonio, the train was headed west. It wasn't headed east. And I told Mel at the time, this train is not going to going to Germany. It's going to the West Coast. And so we ended up in Fort Lawton, Seattle, Washington.
So you didn't have no orders or nothing? You just...
Oh, we went by orders, always by orders. Yes, orders were cut for us. But there in the shipping and receiving, why, you see, the administration just across the way were the ones that got the orders.
Uh-huh.
And so we kind of were, at that time, things were kind of loose anyhow, and so anybody that wanted, they thought they were going to Germany. Well, it ended up that we weren't so smart after all, because we...
Okay, so you got your orders, you didn't know that the numbers sent you to the
just
Pacific.
that number was all it was on that order.
Okay.
And so we went out of Puget Sound on the boat on April the 1st, 1945. It was, and that was when the Marines invaded Okinawa. And the captain aboard the ship at the time said, "Now hear this, now hear this. This ship is bound for Okinawa-jima." And that was, well, he didn't say how long it would take us to get there, but they had to utilize those ships in a lot of various ways. They carried troops, they carried supplies, they carried whoever happened to be on the ship and where you were going. They dropped you off at that point, at that appointed time, but not a point. I beg your pardon. Back up on that appointed time. We had submarines out there that decided that we should go in a different direction every once in a while.
So this was a Liberty ship?
It was a what I understood later was a converted old President Garfield, I believe. It was
The Garfield lines?
It was one of the pleasure boats
Yeah.
that had been converted, and it had a 3-inch gun on the bow and a 5-incher on the fantail. And
What was berthing like? How'd they put you up? Did you sleep in
we
a
had
cabin?
four high down on the lower third deck.
Uh-huh.
And yes, that's it. Some of them were 4, some of them were 3, according to the way the structure of the bow was on the ship. And I might add at that one moment there that our air supply in that ship was not the greatest. So in order to get enough air into the ship, we took bayonets and we jammed holes in the, there were about 6-inch pipes, maybe a little larger, that run through to the outlets for the air, but we couldn't, some of us were in between those outlets and quite a ways, and we jammed holes in there, and the air would come out through those holes. And I might add that those pipes were made of almost 100% asbestos.
Huh.
So you're talking about mesothelioma, I believe is it. Well, I breathed all that during that time going over, and we were at sea for 51 days.
51 days.
And as I remember, and then they put us off. We came into Okinawa in the middle of May, and we were under the Japanese didn't like us being there, of course, and so it was still wartime conditions going on, and so the Navy fella that was running the LCM, landing craft mechanized, with a drop lip to it. We went over the side of our ship on a rope arrangement, and I remember the fellow above me used my helmet as a step. And he'd go every time and he wasn't a light fellow, I remember. And I got down into the LCM with about 20 other boys down there, or more or less, maybe, I don't remember now. But the Navy lads wanted to know if we wanted to get off on that dock over there, which was burning. Part of it was on fire and part of it was still intact. And so we elected to get off on that, but it was still aflame. And so when we got up to the burning part, there was hardly any room to get around without getting singed. So we another LCM came in to the left of us and dropped his lip and put the fire out. Because when they dropped one of those lips, there was quite a wave being created, and the wave washed over the dock that we were walking in on, and so we made a nice dry landing that way without having to get wet.
Do you know why the dock was on fire? Do you know why the dock was on fire?
Well, I think when the Japanese had hit it before we got there, they were above. They were quite high, but our fighters weren't bothering about going up. It's kind of a nuisance raid. Yeah.
Were they dropping bombs on you when you came ashore?
They had been dropping bombs earlier that night, but we were over to the one of our ships, the rudder, the little 2-man submarines, I guess they were, whatever. But anyhow, a torpedo hit one of the rudders on the one of our other PA boats, personnel assaults. We were PA 29. Our boat was PA 29, and before we. Excuse me, I should say ship because we don't use that word boat in the Navy term. And so that was, but I think one of the other PAs were hit, and the destroyer towed him into port. And then I got finally got on the Okinawa beach. Everything was in turmoil. I didn't get joined up with my outfit until the next morning, when I remember a Marine officer came up the beach in a Jeep and wanted to ask where all of the fellows were assigned to, and I said, well, the 92nd Air Depot Group is mine. And this lieutenant that came ashore with me, and there were just the two of us laying there that night, and on that coral reef, I guess more of a coral reef than a shore. Anyhow, we didn't move anymore that night, and he said, soldier, do you have a duffel? Did you bring a duffel bag in? And I said yes. And they were throwing them overboard, and they were going into the drink and everything else, and I never expected to see mine again. And that lieutenant, believe it or not, carried my duffel bag in, and I had carried his in. Of all those soldiers that were that night that had gone ashore, how that ever happened, God only knows. And so we just traded bags, and there we were in good shape again. And I don't know, I never did get his name or what outfit he belonged to. He could have been a Signal Corps, or it could have been anything.
Yeah.
But there was, because we didn't have certain little niches for the 92nd Air Depot Group, and we were on board that ship, and God only knows, the man sleeping next to you might have been somebody entirely different from a different outfit. But the thing was to get over there, and we knew what to do when we got on the beach, and we didn't have any fire. The Marines had taken care of that for us about a month earlier, and they had pushed all of the Japanese soldiers up on north on Okinawa, and it was pretty well secured, except that we had this Marine officer come up, and he dropped these boxes down, and he says, you fellas all through basic training, went through basic, didn't you? Yes. Well, when you go through basic, you're supposed to know how to use a grenade. And we did. We had been trained for it. And so he opened up this box and handed each of us about 3 grenades, and he says, just don't pull up pins on them until you're ready to use them, and which we all knew better not to do. And the thing was that the Marines had gone up the island, and they had neutralized these caves as best they could, but they were in a hurry, and they just, well, a lot of that just drove the Japanese back into those caves, and those caves went clear through a whole mountain, you know. They and so we went up there. That was about one of our first assignments, to throw grenades into those caves and then back away, so that it blew out, but it didn't get any shrapnel that way. And so we came back down, and every night the bombers would go over. The Japanese Mitsubishis, I think they said they were later. The Japanese would come out of the caves and shoot the very pistols up in magnesium flares and light our camps up, and so we'd all head down for the beach. We didn't want to be in that light, of course, and but they were mostly interested. The Japanese were mostly interested in bombing Naha Harbor. They didn't seem to, which thank God that was good, and so they. I remember they hit the beer ship.
Oh no!
And we had to go after that. They had sent divers down to get the beer out of that ship, and by the time we got it, the beer had bellied out because of the pressure on the beer, and the ocean had acted upon the metal, and we drank beer out of. We tried to open it with the top on the top, and I remember our thumbs went through the side a lot of times, and we were drinking beer out of the side of the can. So,
did it maintain its taste?
It did. It still had a beer taste to it, and so we each had 2 cans a day for beer rations. And
do you remember what kind of beer it was?
Just OD on the just OD. You know.
Nobody gets no credit, huh?
And just a plain OD color to it. And just like everything was OD. Our seed rations were OD. And we found out later that some of them came up from Australia. We didn't even, just so long it was food. And, but bully beef was one of them, and fruit salad. I never ate so much fruit salad in my life. But
what were you living in? Were you in tents at that time, or did they have structures built?
In the pup tents, sir.
You're still in pup tents.
Two men to a tent, to a little pup tent arrangement, and you make it's kind of a, you don't go by what the rules are, and they tell you how to do something in the state side that might work and it might not, but there was one carpenter assigned to our outfit, he after all, of course I'm getting ahead of myself, but the typhoons and all that, but I fell in with that carpenter, and several of the boys that seemed to know a little bit about driving a nail and sawing a board, and we kind of formed our own carpenter outfit. So I came up from the airstrip every day. My job was administrative services on the airstrip, and we'd have to get a release from our officer to come up and work with the carpenter fellow, you know. And he acted as the head man, and he would tell us what to do. And but that's, I'm getting ahead of my story, because that was mostly during the typhoon era. And I guess that was about all my combat that I ever had, which wasn't much to begin with, was keeping those Japanese neutralized in those caves. They would come out, and even after the war was over, they had come out, about 8 of them in a little loincloth. All they had on was a loincloth, waving a white flag, and they were walking up the road, and we were sitting there eating our lunch one day and in our makeshift mess hall, and they said, well, let's call the MPs, because the war was over and we weren't going to fire on them, and they didn't have any weapons. All they were doing, waving this white flag and coming up, it goes to show you that our area never was neutralized.
Mm-hmm.
The Japanese always, they knew where we were, but we didn't know where they were.
Right. Were you on Okinawa when the war ended?
Oh, yes. Was I?
Let's talk about that a little bit. Did anybody explain to you what had gone on? Why all of a sudden the Japanese?
No.
The nuclear weapons, nothing like that?
At first, we didn't know whether that bomb was a Japanese bomb or an American bomb.
Uh-huh.
And we, of course, we were relieved when we found out it was on our side that they had, and but I was about 300 miles away from that bomb when it went off, so closer than here to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And I remember the sky got kind of funny, I don't know. And there again, if you had any fallout, well, I went through them, all the asbestos business and all. And so I think there's a lot of that stuff might be scare tactics. Of course, maybe the wind was blowing in the right direction and shielded me from that. But,
what was the reaction amongst you and your friends on the island? I imagine there's a big yelling.
Oh, after they found out that bomb, what the impact it had, and of course, this was when the peace treaty was finally signed. We just went crazy. Because at that time I carried about 3 or 4 unopened letters in my back pocket that I didn't even open up. I didn't figure I was ever coming home again because we were ready to invade Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And so when those bombs went off, especially Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that was again, we started living again.
Yeah.
It was a matter of where we had a new lease on life, and yes, we were very, very happy with that.
What did the military tell you about going home?
Point system, sir.
Point system.
I'm glad you brought that to point. And of course, we hadn't been there only a matter of less than, I think it was about 11 months I recorded on. And it, because I landed there on the middle of May, May, behind the Marines, and I didn't leave there until April March. I got home in April of '46, and the peace was declared in August of 1945.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it was August 11th, if I don't, I'm not, but I should remember that date. And when we came home on the Admiral Mayo, which was a beautiful ship and were treated like kings. Actually, I was never treated so well in my life.
Hello?
And I'm busy right now, honey.
Okay.
I'll be with you in a minute. And and then.
So how did they award you your points? Based on how long you had been there?
Yes, point system was the number. So I couldn't come home
right away.
I didn't have too many points.
Right.
But I do want to add one thing, that the worst part of Okinawa that I can ever remember are those 2 lousy typhoons.
That's what we're going to get to next.
Oh, you know it. I don't want you to cut me off on that.
Oh, no, you got plenty of time. You have plenty of time.
Okay, sir.
That's why I'm...
Uh-huh.
So after the war ended, did life get any better on Okinawa? Did they give you more food, more beer, bring movies in, USO tours?
We had movies, yes. We sat up on signal corps spools of that they used for the wire for communication system during the war. They had wire all over that island. It was like a jungle of Brazil would be all the vines and everything. There was so much wire, so they had these big spools like they used in here, and 2 or 3 of us could sit up on the spools, but they weren't very comfortable. But we get all the best movies up there. That's depending on the weather.
Yeah.
If it was clear weather, and then I remember this. But the main thing was, I think the typhoon did more damage than the Japanese did.
Okay.
Because they put at least three Liberty ships right up on the beach, and one Liberty ship was full of lumber, it had all kinds. It was like a small lumber yard. And we started unloading that lumber. And I say we, there were fellows in that business that seemed to get in there with their trucks and bring that. Weapons carriers were a little bit larger than Jeeps.
Mm-hmm.
And they were always pretty good to carry stuff in lieu of regular, if there wasn't enough trucks available. And they bring all our lumber, 2x4s and 1x8s and everything else. And if you wanted some, they just unload it right there for you. Well, that's where that carpenter fella needed all the help. And there was about 8 or 10 of us that knew how to drive nails. And I remember one old Clem Strand, from I'll use the name, from Minnesota. He was a Swedish boy. And I remember he had a 1x8 there, and he put about 8 nails in the end of that. He wanted that board to stay down on that surface. And I said, Clem, you don't have to put that many nails in there. And so I showed him that 3 nails would be suffice. And so we went on. And then I was introduced to a power saw for the first time, a skill saw, if you may.
Mm-hmm.
Please. It was a skill saw, and that's the first time. And then our generator, we had generators that we used, and once we cranked that generator up, we were in business with that skill saw, and we made platforms for our tents.
Ah.
That's what the typhoon had blown everything away, and so I guess I did more building in that length of time than I ever did. One fella, we needed foremen, so I ended up as a foreman. and the one carpenter man that was assigned to our unit, he was the big honcho of all. He'd go up and down and you do it, okay, now do this and do that. Not one blueprint among a whole bunch of us. We were just doing it out of the top of our. This boy was telling us how to lay these blocks up. And,
please leave a message after the tone.
Yeah, hi Bob, this is Kathleen. Can you please call me
She knows I'm in here.
4:30
That's Kathleen.
and let me know
Yeah, she knows I'm
about
here.
how you feel about
Yeah.
David's dog
But anyhow, back
and
to
the
the
exercise
track.
class.
And
There's some people that are not happy
we
with
got
it, and I have to find out from each individual how they feel.
let's see,
So if you could please call me at 733-6821.
I wish we could edit this out.
4:30.
If I'd have known she's going to go on so long, I'd have stopped
Thank
it.
you.
She'll have to-
Bye-bye.
Sorry about that. That's going to be on your tape.
Well,
Anyway.
Anyhow, about all the other things we did, was amuse ourselves. We'd go out on the coral reefs and find the little shell animals and make beads out of them, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And well, they thing to do until you waited for your points to come home. And
I take it they'd set up kitchens and sure you're getting good hot meals by then, no longer eating sea rations? Or?
yes, by that time they started building Quonset huts, and we
Okay.
had replacements coming in all the time.
Yeah.
They were always fussing about this and that. We said, you just missed the second typhoon, buddy. Wait until the third one gets here. But I never heard of it. But I remember those fellows were so fussy about every little thing that this. And well, we had been over there long enough, I guess, that even just a can of bully beef from Australia tasted pretty good. In fact, it was. I do want to mention that when I went back to my tent during one typhoon, I wanted to get my personal belongings out of my foot locker. We had all of our beds had blown out, and our tents and everything was blown out to sea. There were airplanes, little L4 airplanes were blown out to sea, and our anemometer laid on the airstrip down there and it broken and blew it still off. it read 168 or 69 miles an hour on it.
Wow.
As far as it went. That was the wind velocity at that time it went off of it, and it was everything was just blowing, and the ocean would come up to you and go back, and you'd pray to God that thing when it would, and we were like 20 feet above sea level, and that ocean would come up, and the boys later in the Navy said they were out on the destroyers, and they said, you should have been on a destroyer. You'd be going north one time, and the wave would hit you, and you'd be going south the next time. There was no steerage on the, terrible. So, but believe it or not, our whole squadron came through it all right. We were hid away in caves. And I spent the night. I went back, like I say, to get this stuff out of my footlocker, and the lid blew off of my footlocker, and that's the last I remember of it. And then I had a sudden bang on my. Thank God I had my helmet on, or I wouldn't be here today talking about it. On the back of my head, it was a tent pole broke. It was about 2.5 inches thick, the tent pole. Broke and crashed right down and hit me on the head. And the next thing, it drove me right down into the mud, and the next thing I remember, 2 hands scraping mud off of my face, and I was sitting in a vehicle. And these boys were Afro fellas, and they always, at that time, the Afros and the whites were split. The Afros liked to run the trucks, and the whites did the rest. And there was no argument. We never had any fights. And when they pulled that mud off of my face, I remember when I'm laughing, and he says, well, he's not one of us, shall we throw him back? and I had so much money, he couldn't tell whether I was an Afro or a white. And but they were the quartermaster truck boys, and they had a complete control of that. And we obeyed them. What they said, if we had so much time on a Jeep or a weapons carrier, we had to get it back by a certain time. Well, that's the way it was. And we were all good guys. We just seemed to have that color line barrier, and but I respected them. They respected me, but thank God I had that helmet on that night, and not the liner, but the helmet too. Mm-hmm. It drove. Next thing I knew, they were wiping mud off my face. I can't remember. I suppose was knocked out from them, but that wind was so terrible that. I have a little story that maybe shouldn't be. Maybe you can cut it out if you want to. But of course, there was a time when we had to go to the bathroom, and so the fellas our clothes were all wet. We were just continually wet. We just lived in wet clothes. And he said,
during the typhoon.
well, just wet yourself. You'd be clean in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. We just bothered. We didn't even bother to go to. There was no latrine. It had been blown away. You couldn't find a latrine anyway. And that existed for a good 24 hours at least before we could even catch our breath. And then that was the first typhoon, They had the second typhoon was when the lumber ship went up on the beach, It's terrible. But like I say, when I got home, I guess this was the part that my wife met me.
Well, let's get you on the ship going home again. What was the name of the ship that took you home?
Then was the Admiral Mayo.
Admiral.
Admiral M-A-Y-O.
A,
Admiral Mayo.
oh, okay, like Mayo Clinic.
Beautiful ship. It must have been half again as big as our PA boat was.
Had it been a liner before the military took it over?
It looked like it might have been built for that hospital. It was a hospital ship.
Oh, it was a hospital ship. So
Yeah,
okay,
it was a hospital ship.
that would explain the Mayo.
Yeah.
Okay.
There were an awful lot of, well, I won't say an awful lot, but there were fellas who were on there incapacitated one way or another.
Were you injured, or were you just luck of the draw?
No, I wasn't injured at all. I was never injured, suffer any injury.
Yeah.
And so when I got home, maybe you want to, actually, and the only thing I remember on the Mayo was the time change. We were always crossing that date line.
Right.
And we either we gained a day or we lost a day. You know?
Yeah.
I can't remember. It seems like we gained a day coming back, but you can correct me on those dateline bits.
I think you do. I think you're right. I think you gained it when you come
I think
back.
I gained a day, and because I remember I wanted to get home so bad, and when I got home, well, my wife met me at the Camp Beale Separation Center gate, and my son was 3 years old, a little older, going on 4, and so when I approached the car, I remember he got out of the car and he stood there and waited, and then when I come up, he started walking around and stood at the back of the car, and I told Margaret, I says, "What's the matter with Bob?" And she says, "Well, I don't think he knows you." And so I said, "Well, Bob, I'm your dad." And he goes like that, and he just says, and then his mother says, "Well, get in the car, don't be a fool," like that. And he wouldn't get in the car. And so I started to get in the driver's position. And so she says, well, he didn't want to ride if I was going to drive.
Please leave a message after the tone.
Oh, that's silly. And but anyhow, we finally got home to Sacramento. But that it had been about 18 months since I'd seen him, and so to this day, I have an alienated older boy, and then my twins were born after I got home.
Yeah.
And they're about 4 years younger. So I guess in closing, I can just say that that's what the war did to me. It busted my family up. So to this day, my twins have nothing to do with that older boy, and the older boy, it separated my family. So, but I'm lucky that I lost my first wife in 1976, a bicentennial year, and then I was remarried a year later to another girl who died in 2007. So, who incidentally was a Lady Marine. Mary had been, Margaret was my first wife, and Mary was my second wife.
Okay.
And so I don't know, but that I've never. I belonged to the American Legion post 61 for a while until they seemed to be too much on having a. I like good times, but I don't want when the times are going on. They're having their meetings and things like that. Some of them would, continue to want to have good times and things like that. So I don't know. My father was a World War I veteran, and I just went my merry way and went up the ladder until when I retired from the Department of Justice. I was a supervisor over 30 people.
Did you use your GI Bill?
Never used a GI Bill at all.
Didn't use it at all, huh?
I just went straight with a state retirement system, a PERS, and I've never touched a penny of Social Security at all. My retirement comes out of PERS.
Right.
And it pays for this place here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. Well, we appreciate you doing this filming for us, and we'll get a copy to you. And we appreciate your service to your country, during the war. And
just did what had to be done.
all right. Well, we appreciate you having done it. Okay, so you have a good.